Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee meeting. To members of the public who are joining us on YouTube, either today or any day in the future, thank you so much for your participation. Your being here means a lot to us. And if you've been watching and following along since the beginning, it's been about a year and a half at this point. Almost. It's been a long road, and we are really starting to get into the meat of the plan for moving forward. But we always talk about this process as a marathon. And in this marathon that we are preparing to run, we've laced up our shoes. We're stretching now. We have not even taken off at the starting line yet. So we have a ton of work ahead of us, and we've done a lot so far, but there's just such a long way to go. So we appreciate everyone following along, participating. You'll hear tonight that we are going to be moving forward soon with the community engagement phase of the project. And we're going to be seeking input from you on how you want to get involved and what the best way to do that for you is. And yeah, we'll be talking about that more tonight. So thanks again. And thank you to we've extended the groups at the request of the Lewisboro Town Board. We've requested the groups that are represented here from town to town specifically. So we've got the steering committee members are invited. Also, the chair of the planning board is invited monthly, the chair of the zoning board of appeals, and the chair of ACARC as well, the architectural review committee. So also our town board liaisons. I know Andrea was running a little bit late. Thank you for being here, Dan. So we've got a full house. I'm going to turn, well, one order of, oh, actually, we'll do that later. We don't have quorum yet. Okay, so I'm in the interest of time, let's just get started. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Valerie, who is our project manager from Nelson Pope Voorhees, and the fantastic consulting group we're working with. And she and her team have been doing a ton of work behind the scenes. And we've got a full agenda for tonight. I see Mark just joined. So before I turn it over, I just want to make a motion to approve formally the minutes from our meeting in July that were submitted to the group for review. Can I guess Charlene is seconding? All in favor? Aye. Mark, Charlene, Katie, all favoring. Okay, thank you so much. Turning it over to Valerie.
Great, thank you. So we have a full packed agenda tonight. A lot of this, as Katie said, is what I'm calling the housekeeping items. We're really dealing with some of the introductory first steps of this comprehensive plan process. So in the future, we will be starting to dive into some of the existing conditions and analyses, but at first we need to get some of these housekeeping items finalized, which deals with the schedule, the community engagement plan, community participation surveys. So that's really what our focus is tonight, and I'll talk about next steps towards the end of the meeting. So to start off with, I wanted to talk to this committee about the schedule update. So based upon prior conversations that we had with the committee from the last two meetings, it's clear that the committee wants to make sure, and which is a very I think it's a great thing that this committee is planning to do, is to undertake a community participation survey. And as a result, that was going to require a slight shift in when we hold the first public workshop, which will then shift the schedule. So I'm just going to take a moment and share my screen and talk a little bit about the schedule. Apologize, let me just get, okay, there it is. Okay, can everyone see this? Okay, so this originally we had a 13-month process. We're no longer looking at a 13-month schedule process. Instead, it's going to be about 17-month schedule. This is really, for the most part, is because of this community participation survey. But I wanted to note that the schedule for the inventory analysis report, as well as the town committee meetings, which If you recall, we're meeting with all the town committees throughout the town of Lewisboro, as well as the planning board, zoning board, and the architectural review committee. And we will also be touching base with the town board. Those will remain as scheduled. So we are still anticipating having an existing conditions analysis for you by the end of a draft report by the end of November. And we are still planning to have town committee meetings and town land use board meetings and council meetings within the fall months. And I know I reached out to Janet and Robin earlier this week, and we're starting to reach out to a number of the other committees to start setting up those meetings. So those will continue as scheduled, but what we are proposing now is to have this first workshop in January. And the reason why we're pushing it out to January is a couple of things. One, as tonight, as you know, on the agenda, we're going to be talking about this community participation survey that the steering committee is going to undertake. This in itself, once we get it out, once we get the survey out the door, we're planning to do some community outreach in September associated with this community participation survey. And then clearly you're going to want to have time for people to fill out the survey, get the results. And then as part of this is also to identify your community outreach teams, right? So you're going to need some time to develop those outreach teams and then also start conducting some of the outreach with the outreach teams. So that in and of itself is going to take a few months to get that together. And then we're heading right into the holidays. So we felt that this first meeting should probably be, conducted in January. It's not really going to change too much the overall schedule of the comprehensive plan because, like I said, we are still planning to have the existing conditions analysis for you at the, normal time as we were initially anticipating. The only thing that will shift as a result of the first public meeting is some of the other subsequent tasks, because you're not going to develop your goals and recommendations until after you have your first public workshop. So that will, because of that shifts your schedule. But in actuality, I think it actually helps your schedule in terms of outreach that we can conduct in the springtime, because your second workshop, and especially the Hamlet area workshops, are all going to take place March and April. And this allows us, and then the draft of the comprehensive plan would be released sometime in the summer. This will allow for us to capture some of those spring events to also publicize the comprehensive plan and some of the public outreach process. And again, I'm calling this a draft the proposed schedule because I think you'll find throughout this process, it is going to shift. And I'll continue updating the steering committee as we move along. And as things shift, that's completely fine. And we'll just adjust as needed based upon what's the circumstances that are taking place, based upon public feedback, and then as well as some of the outreach that you decide that you want to undertake for each one of the different workshops. So are there any questions on the schedule?
I just want to add a little context for faces that are new to this meeting and folks that might be joining us on YouTube and not have seen the meeting last month. So part of the reason why we feel it's really important to have the public participation survey is, we want to make sure that when the first public meeting comes around, as many people know about it as possible. And spreading the word, we have our normal methods and things that are sort of cookie cutter, but we really want to make sure that we're reaching everyone in the community. And that includes groups that have been historically underrepresented. When we were talking in previous meetings about who those groups are in town, there isn't like a great handle on what those groups are, how we reach them. So we really need to take time and be thoughtful and do some research to figure out how we can just make sure that everybody understands the meetings are happening and we understand what people want from the meeting, and that expectations on the side of the community and the committee are all matching up. And the more time we take to do that thoughtfully, the better. And just a point of clarification for anyone who's wondering, moving the timeline like this does not alter the project budget. And that is something that we worked out early on with Valerie and her team, that, the work was going to be the same, but the time over which we do it could be flexible.
Right. So, so with that, so if there's no other questions on that, then I think we can move into the next agenda item, which is the community engagement plan. So, last month we sent basically like a draft plan, and what I want to just sort of take a step back is the community engagement plan is basically a framework, right? So as much as we are trying to be as detailed as possible, it does not mean everything is completely set in stone. It just really says this is the framework in which we're going to operate under. You will find as you move through this process, there are going to be changes. There's going to be things that come up. There's going to maybe even be shifts. And so that is completely fine, and we can work through that. But this is just really just so that the public understands the overall framework, and then as well as the steering committee agrees with the framework in which we're going to operate under. So we provided a number of comments and feedback and edits to the community draft community engagement plan. And a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight. I know this committee is very, is interested, and we want to bring in as much equity and accessibility principles and best practices as possible. So I just wanted to make sure that it was clear to the steering committee as well as to the public that all the public meetings are going to provide a means for the public to be able to communicate and request any accommodations that they need prior to the public meetings or public outreach events. And they'll be providing that information in your outreach materials. All in-person public meetings will be held at locations that meet ADA, barrier-free, and space requirement standards. All meeting materials will be clear and in large enough font that will be easily readable. All meeting materials can be translated into another language if it is identified by the town and deemed appropriate to do so for the meetings. Any in-person meetings will have appropriate public address systems and microphones, and all virtual meetings will utilize auto-generated captioning. Also, we will be providing, during the virtual meetings, like provide closed captioning, read all comments in the chat room out loud as a best practice. Before speaking, announce speakers' names. We're going to mute microphones when someone is not actively speaking, and describe any visuals that are being shown on the screen. So those are some of the elements that we're automatically going to do in each and every meeting. In addition, as Katie mentioned, we'll be going out with this public participation survey. And so we'll also be collecting some additional feedback as to other accessibility issues that we might need to consider as part of the public outreach and public participation process. A couple other things I wanted to highlight on the updates to the community engagement plan. So originally we had very specific dates for the comprehensive plan steering committee meetings. Because of some of the flexibility in the schedule, now we have shifted those as just meeting 4, meeting 5, but we sort of summarized what we're anticipating undertaking in those meetings. Again, it's just a framework. So as we get into the actual process itself, we might find that some of those agenda items or those topic areas shift a bit as well. A couple other things I just wanted to highlight. We also talked a little bit about the community participation survey and community outreach teams. This is something that, again, we were able to work with Katie and the committee and really define those over the last month or so. And that will be, we're waiting to, once we have the results of the public participation survey, the community outreach teams can be developed, as well as what their actual role will be. And so again, we let the language in there is pretty flexible, noting that these community outreach teams will be developed. And then ultimately the steering committee will identify the roles in which those community outreach teams will play. Another couple of things I wanted to highlight, the public workshops. So right now we're proposing the first public workshop to be virtual, and that the second public workshop, and that's going to be like a town-wide workshop. The second public workshop will be in person but is proposed to have, that will be in person in the Lewisboro Public Library, which would be like a town-wide workshop. And then we'll be having individual Hamlet workshops, which each one of those will be in a virtual format. And then the third workshop, we are proposing right now to have we're proposing to have it in person. And the reason being is that third workshop is really going to focus on zoning amendments. And I find working with communities when there are particular zoning amendments, sometimes people just want to come in and talk to somebody and say, this is my property, how is it going to change, right? And that's easier done in an in-person format and sort of like a very casual situation where people can come in and feel free to ask those questions and get the information they're looking for. But in terms of, so that's what we have right now in terms of formats. Again, those can be shifted to in-person meetings if that's ultimately what the committee wants to see happen, or we can shift them all to virtual meetings if there is a need to do so. And then finally, I think we also have we did some additional amendments to the hard to reach populations. Again, right now working with the committee, as well as we spoke to the town supervisor. Right now, we're just identifying the senior and veteran populations as your two main hard to reach populations, and we'll work with those particular organizations to maybe do additional, maybe even a focus group or reach out to them individually or find out how to get them best to participate. But we are going to work with the comprehensive plan steering committee as well as the town. And if there are other populations, organizations that do come to the forefront, we'll work with incorporating them into any sort of public outreach.
Just to add to that, Valerie, there definitely not an if there definitely are other hard to reach and underrepresented groups in town, and we're committed to being able to serve them with the same methodology that
yes.
they would receive a focus group or some kind of forum where they would be able to and feel comfortable to provide their feedback directly. The same way that the seniors and the veterans will receive those focus groups.
Yes.
But we're kind of doing that work behind the scenes to still figure out before we can actually name them specifically in the outreach plan. But that work will be ongoing, continues to be.
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, if it comes up somewhere, even it doesn't necessarily have to come up at the beginning of the process. If it comes up throughout the process, we will make adjustments as needed. Okay. So are there any questions to the outreach plan? Does anybody have any comments on the drafts? Okay. So, Janet?
Yeah, I don't know how many people you usually expect, but the Lewisboro Library doesn't seem like a huge environment to have, especially if you have charts up and so forth. I'm just wondering if there are other, and I'm tossing it out, I guess, to people to see if there's a bigger area. I think maybe the Lewisboro Library does allow for a couple of breakout areas, but so I guess my question starts with how many people typically show up at this, and is it sort of like some people come in and leave and other people come in? How would this actually work? Because I'm just I sort of envisioned 100 or 150 people, and that seems like a lot for the library, but maybe I have no concept of what this would actually look like.
Would the courtroom be a better forum, Dan?
The last time we did a townwide meeting, if you remember, or maybe 8 years, maybe even longer than that. But we used the South Salem Fire Department, big room and lots of wall space, and putting up sticky, post-it things to write on, and but it's one big open room now.
So Valerie, yeah, go ahead and answer the question of what the flow of the event looks like.
Right. So we typically, especially when we have the workshops, we typically like to have it so that it's open for a number of hours, so people can kind of come as they see fit, as it works in their schedule. And so we will have like series of boards throughout the room, series of questions, series of exercises. People will provide their feedback, and then once they're done, they can leave. So that we find is the most effective. So it doesn't require necessarily having to have somebody, a room as big for maximum capacity. That being said, If you feel that, because there are some communities that say, well, we start the meeting at 7 and everybody comes at 7, then we work with other communities that say, well, we start the meeting at 7 and people kind of trickle in throughout the 2-hour process. So we can, if you think the South Salem Fire Department is probably a better location, we can absolutely change that location. And again, as we get closer to these meetings, we're going to be diving into the details of, the run of show, what we're anticipating, and then we'll be looking for feedback from you in terms of, a little bit more about the population, your typical habits, and, the concerns that you might have in terms of, do we keep stuff open? Do we have stuff, very regimented? We start and we end. It varies. And so we can work with you on that. I think the challenge for virtual meetings that there really does need to be like a starting and stopping time. But in terms of the in-person meetings, we can have that much more of a, an open window.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. I do remember that when I think the 1985 plan was done, Paul Lewis, who helped run it, told me that they would have 150, to 200 people show up at each meeting. And they ended up with over, I think, 500 or 600 individual people from the town. So I don't know that we'll get the same kind of turnout, or maybe people will opt for the virtual, but I just, and I think the other suggestions of places are great to consider. And thank you for also letting me hear something about the flow. And I absolutely agree. We don't have to decide now. I'm glad to hear there are alternatives.
Just to add to the mix, and this is something that the steering committee has been discussing behind the scenes between meetings, is that we want an in-person location to feel welcoming and inclusive, and the library certainly is the heart of our community. And it is one of the most accessible in terms of ease of getting in and actually being ADA compliant. Beyond, that building is one of the most welcoming and friendly, accessible buildings in the community. And we also were thinking we could make it like a real community exciting event, like have it at the library, have story time. This would require a lot of volunteer effort, obviously, and is not set in stone, but just an idea that there's story time at the same time. So there's sort of a built-in childcare situation, have food trucks parked outside, like just to make something that's a real draw for the community. Maybe we utilize outdoor space and have workstations outdoors. I mean, it's January, so that, oh, no, this isn't January. This is in the spring, right? Yes, this is in the spring.
Yeah, the in-person would be in the spring, yeah.
So use outdoor space as well, kind of get creative with it and make it feel like a really vibrant community event as opposed to just a meeting.
Caroline?
Well, if it gets to the point that we think there's a lot more people, maybe we can ask the school district to use one of their facilities, because that's also a very welcoming place and people know where it is, et cetera, and there's parking.
Right. I think one of the things I wanted to come back, if we really do think you're going to get 500 people, this committee might want to consider having it in person instead of a virtual option. Right, because the very first public workshop is really going to be looking at your SWOT, which is like your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities. And so that's really getting that kind of feedback. And if you end up with 500 people, that ends up being more of like, especially virtually, it's almost like that's when you do just a presentation. And that's not necessarily what we want to do as the first community feedback event.
Mm-hmm. This is where the participation survey will be super valuable. We're going to get a sense of who wants to participate and how, and then we can tailor the plan accordingly.
Yeah. And if we need to have 2 sessions, maybe we can do something like that, but we'll have to figure that out if we really think we're going to get like 500 people.
I want to be clear, it wasn't 500 at once. They had, I think, 4 or 5 meetings, and the total ended up being 500.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. No, it wasn't. It wasn't that big all at once. Sorry if I confused everybody.
I saw Mark had his hand raised.
Yeah, so I thought, Dan, while you're on, and Valerie, give us a little color experience protocol. So two questions in terms of public outreach and public input. And so this is kind of a hearing. So my two questions are, would you want, or is it acceptable to ask for people to register to speak in advance, so we know if we're walking into a meeting that's going to have 500 people or just 20? And the other question is, and that's really, a question for Dan, I guess, on, how the town has handled these big meetings. And the other question is, are we responding to them? Are we, yes, you've been heard, next? Or are we actually using that time forum to respond instructively, or are we responding separately to them privately or in public? I just wondered how that information Q&A is gonna roll.
Right. So typically, we like to have what we call breakout rooms. So we'll take, so let's just say 50 people show up. We will then divide those 50 people into maybe 5 breakout rooms. And so then you end up with a facilitator and then have 10 people in that group virtually. And then you have that kind of discussion, which is why I was raising the question of, if we really do anticipate having, let's say, hundreds of people, then it might be better to have that in-person meeting, open it up on a Saturday and say, for 4 hours, please come in, and then that way that allows for people just to kind of come in, take their time, walk throughout the rooms, have the discussions, put their feedback in, and we don't have the situation where we have too many people online and not enough facilitators, or too many people in a group where you can't have that kind of dialogue.
Yeah, I don't have any particular additional experience to add to that. That sounds good. And the idea to try and start to get a handle on it through the survey seems to make sense too. So
I don't think, Mark, that it's like a public hearing. It really is a gathering of information from the residents as to what they want. And I've seen it, and I'm sure Valerie has done it a number of times. The facilitator will sort of get people involved, give them the questions and give them guidance. They'll get together, break out and put together their priorities. So so it doesn't get contentious or anything. It's a workshop. I believe that's right, Valerie.
Right. I mean, it's very similar to what we're having now, this kind of discussion. And so, but the questions would be very poignant at, we're talking about your parks and open space, and we'll ask questions like, what do you find that the does really well with the parks and open space, or what parks, are high priority to you, and so this is where people say, oh, I really like this park or this particular park, and we need some additional attention, or one of the things that we have concerns with. And then that's when we'll take notes, and so they'll moderate, walk them through the different we're calling topic areas, and we'll talk about what are the strengths, what are the opportunities for those particular areas, what are the weaknesses, what are things that the town needs to work on, and then what are some of what we call threats, which is really basically the town can identify if things don't change, what could become more problematic in the future. And so that's
you don't need answers, right?
No.
Okay, I guess my question was prompted when Valerie said people may come in and say, how is this affecting my property? And I just imagine like 500 people.
That's the first workshop is the SWOT workshop. The second workshop will really be focused on what we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the environmental topic areas, and then ask the more poignant questions. So let's say, for example, people talk about how there's more need for housing. We might come in with different, visual images of what kind of types of housing would you be happy with in the community? Or let's say, for example, there are specific questions on or specific feedback we've been receiving on certain parks or open space. We might ask some additional information on that. Then when we get to the hamlet areas, we're going to really focus in on those hamlets. Again, same environmental topic areas, but now it's going to focus on Golden's Bridge, or it'll focus on Cross River. And so then we'll get a little bit more, we'll be able to dive a little bit more into the details. So that's where, but then the third public meeting is really going to be about the zoning amendments, right? And it's really going to be focused on what are we actually implementing. And so that you might have people coming in saying, I see that there's zoning changes. This is my property. Is it going to affect my individual property?
And can you add color on pop-up events too?
Yes. Oh, thank you. That's right. I forgot to. So we do, as part of that, the outreach teams now, we did put a little bit of information into the public engagement plan that basically identifies that there would potentially be pop-up events. We still have all the events listed from the town of Lewisboro. As we go through again through the process, we'll start talking about, here are the events that are coming up to the fall. Do we need to populate any of those events with the steering committee or outreach members? And then what do we set? What do we distribute? And then we'll also talk about other pop-up events, because there might be some times that there's no other town events taking place, or maybe there's something that we really want to try to get additional feedback on because we're missing a particular segment of the town population. So then we can strategically pick like an event where, or a place that people show up and then they solicit feedback or provide outreach materials at that particular place and time. And so I anticipate starting like once we meet again, we'll have definitely a topic area each and every meeting about public outreach. And then we'll start diving into some of these details about what we want to do and how we want to work with the outreach teams, as well as the other public meetings that we'll be undertaking. Dan?
I know you're meeting with the various committees.
Yeah.
But is there any point at which sort of committee members are together with the public and, public's talking about like their topic, and then, there's a chance for the committee to be sort of part of that dialogue, as opposed to like you're meeting them and then you're meeting the public?
So that's a great question. So the committee meetings that we're having, and we're really soliciting the meetings that we're going to be having with the town committees, like your housing committee, as well as like your sustainability committee, is getting feedback from them, not only the work that they do, but maybe some of the issues or concerns that they've seen with their work that we should pay attention to. Maybe there's some additional information that we're not aware of that we can glean from them. So that's really what the purpose of those meetings are. But we're also hoping that they become part of like your outreach teams, and that we also hope that they participate actually in all the public workshops as well. Because while they might be committee members, they're also residents within the town. So, so we are going to encourage them to continue, paying attention and participating throughout the process. With the land use boards, though, we will be meeting with them at the beginning of the process, again, to get their initial thoughts and feedback on, issues of concern. Then we'll also be meeting with them again, kind of midstream, to say, this is where we're going with these items, or these are the recommendations that have been brought up. Is there anything that we should be aware of, and get their feedback on that as well. So does that answer your question? Okay.
Does anybody else, anybody that hasn't spoken yet, have any questions about the community outreach plan? Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at summarizing, and then we have a few more minutes. So Valerie, you can summarize even more and wrap up. And I know there's a few other things on the topic before we move on. But I think that the community outreach plan, to Valerie and your team's credit, does a really great job of, in its final form now, and there has been a lot of back and forth on it in the past 2 months behind the scenes. It does a great job of really focusing in on our mission, of creating, actually, I'm just going to read our mission statement so I don't butcher it. We want to engage the full Lewisboro community and capture this vision in an updated comprehensive plan. And we want to ensure fair and equal opportunities for all members of the community to provide input throughout this multi-year process. So this plan does a great job of building on that, and we've really taken an eye towards making sure that it's inclusive. We want to take accessibility and community inclusive actions, not just words, into account. We want to be sensitive about people identifying with a particular hamlet And we want to create space for folks to have collaborative and sort of free-form conversations, and be creative in how we engage the community using a variety of methods, virtual, in-person, pop-up, and give our community members a chance to actually participate in the process by being part of a community outreach team. Not just coming to meetings, but also drumming up support, bringing other people to meetings, spreading the word, asking questions, getting answers, things like that. So I think I speak for the committee when I say that it's at a place where we are definitely feeling really comfortable with it now. But if anybody has substantial comments or feels differently, definitely we need to sort that out before we move on. So I'll kick it to Valerie just to wrap up the topic and figure out where we go from here. And obviously it's a working document, so it's never final and set in stone, but what do we do with it now?
Right. So it looks like if the committee is comfortable, we'll accept all the changes that we made. I think it would probably be best if we entitle it like Working Community Engagement Plan, so that the public also understands it's a fluid document. And then we'll get started on actually its implementation. And there will be a lot of, I think, behind the scenes work with trying to start making sure, I mean, you already have a great website set up, but starting to really start providing as much information as possible to that website so that people can see that this is, the comprehensive plan process is really starting at this point.
Mm-hmm. And so committee members, are we all feeling comfortable with it? Raise of hands. Yes. Nodding heads, raising hands. Yes. And I know John is comfortable with it too. He is not near internet connection right now. I know that the chairs of the other boards and our board member liaisons have had a couple months with the document. So do we feel confident that we've gathered the information from the different boards represented here, and that we can consider this a working document to be posted on our website? Okay,
Great.
I see lots of nodding heads, thumbs.
Yep.
Okay, great. Great.
So what we'll do is, I think for the next meeting, when we do come back, I think I want to talk a little bit more about the virtual versus in-person format for the first public workshop, just so that we have a good sense of how we want to proceed. And maybe by that time, we'll also have some initial responses to the public participation survey. And so this will give us a sense of what the public actually wants as well. Okay. Excellent. All right, so the next topic we wanted to talk about is the public participation survey. So, Katie, I'm happy if you wanted to introduce this talk a little bit about the concept and how it sort of came about, and then we can talk a little bit about, I did provide a couple questions. I know, Janet, you also provided some thoughts. And so I think, I'll turn it over to Katie in a minute, but I think the questions that we provided were really focused on the accessibility issue, and then also who wants to help participate in outreach. That being said, some of the questions that Janet brought up, which were really good, is, okay, if we do that outreach, what's the best way to reach out to, how do people get their information? So that might be some additional questions that this steering committee might want to consider, as well as others. So Katie, why don't you talk a little bit about how the community participation survey came about?
So the origins of this conversation, when we first started looking at the community engagement plan, that Valerie and her team provided us as the committee, our initial reaction was like, great, but how are we actually going to execute this? Because spreading the word about these forums is not a task that the people represented here on this meeting that we can take on ourselves. Nor should it be, because if we want as many people to participate as possible, then we're going to need people from all corners of the community. And I mean that geographically, but also figuratively. We need everybody to be helping to spread the word. We need everybody to know what we're doing and understand the objectives of the comprehensive plan, what it is not. So there's a lot of communication that needs to happen. And we wanted to take a step back and be really thoughtful about alerting the town that this is happening again, now that we're closer to the starting line, and B, figuring out who's excited about participating. Some people have already raised their hands and reached out directly to us, but we suspect that once more people know what's going on, they're going to raise their hands too. So we want to tap into that network and find those people. And we also, it's a participation survey first and foremost, but we do also want to get a handle on accessibility needs. So we want to know from people answering the survey if they have particular needs for meetings that we should be aware of. Some people, and preferences. Some people prefer virtual versus in person. We just want to tap into all of that. With regards to the accessibility questions, we don't need to come up with those ourselves. We have a fantastic accessibility committee that is a committee of the town, and they have offered to lend their expertise there. There are actually people on that committee that work in the accessibility space, that understand best practices for asking these types of questions. So we're going to pass that off and use their feedback to make that part of the survey. Really just best practices is the best way to say it. And we understand that sending out a survey in English, for example, is not going to do the trick in terms of finding people in town who would need translation services, or wouldn't feel comfortable attending a meeting if it was a huge event and there were lots of people around. So we do need to do some grassroots organizing behind the scenes as well to figure out, are there Latinx members of our community who need translation services? Do they feel comfortable asking for those services? And if not, is there some anonymous way that we can solicit that feedback? So questions like that we want to be really thoughtful about. So that's it. That's my background and how we kind of arrived here. But the goal really is just to figure out who wants to participate and how.
Great, thank you, Katie. So I think with that, what we really need to, I think, focus on, I think, for this steering committee and for over the next, I would say probably the next few weeks, because if we want to try to have, there's the library fair in September. So if the committee wants to have, materials to distribute at the public library fair to say, please take this survey, the survey needs to be developed prior to that point in time. And we need to have that that needs to be up and running. So I would say over the, we probably want to have, I would think by the September, probably the last week in August, we need to have the questions finalized and the survey finalized. So I think, we're looking for some, I think, Katie, you're looking for some volunteers to help with pulling together the final list of questions. And then also, I believe this one's going on to the town's Survey Monkey survey. Just for this board's information, we will be doing another outreach survey during the comprehensive plan, but this is specifically just dealing with the outreach.
Right. And that survey NPV will be leading.
Right.
And doing the heavy lifting on, and that is in scope and part of our project agreement. This participation survey is something extra that we came up with along the way, and that's why the steering committee is going to be doing the heavy lifting on creating it and publishing it That way we don't need to add anything extra to the project budget at this time. And we're familiar with the SurveyMonkey platform. And we've used that account was already in existence and already on the town's budget separately. So we're just going to tap into that and do this survey. So yeah, we do need some volunteers to finalize the questions and actually make it active in SurveyMonkey. And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, so we could decide that offline as well if that feels more comfortable.
Yeah, I worked on the original survey, so I'm happy to be part of that.
That would be great, Larry. You're definitely the SurveyMonkey expert, but I didn't want to specifically dump it in your lap.
And we'd be happy to look at the questions that, because I know, because I think we want to try to, and as right somewhere along the emails back and forth, somebody mentioned we want to try to not lose people. We want to keep the survey as distinct as possible. So I do think there's ways, like, I think, Janet, you had a lot of good potential resources. We can probably consolidate a number of your questions into like one question that says, what are the resources that you utilize to, obtain information in the town, and then just have people do check marks. So I can put, if you want, I can take that, Janet's information, put that together in a question and add it to our suggested questions to start off with. And then one of the things that we specifically did in the questions when it was, asking people to, if they want to participate, is there are some people that get a little bit nervous about having to put their email in at the beginning of a survey, right? So this way it offers them the ability to put the email in, or if they just want to be anonymous, they can be anonymous. So that was the reason why we have specifically identifying putting emails in, because my suggestion would be not to put the email in as a requirement in order to take the survey.
I had one specific question. I really liked how the question, let me find it here.
I have it. I can pull it. You want me to screen share it?
Yeah, that'd be great. That there's two options. Like, do you want to be part of an outreach team? If yes, then provide your contact information. Do you just want to be on an email list so you know when meetings are happening, then provide your email? That kind of gives people two options. One is going to be more work. One is just being aware of when meetings are. And I think I just wanted to kind of clarify, I think what makes sense is that we ask, yes, count me in. I want to be part of an outreach team. And it says what the outreach team is expected to do right above that. Undertaking community outreach to promote upcoming public meetings and distribute information. So once we have the list of people who are interested in being on the outreach teams, then we can follow up with that group of people to sort them into the team that they're most interested in. I feel like doing that up front would potentially make it more time consuming, messy, and lose some responders just based on time consuming process. But I just kind of want to get
and I would agree with you on that. And one of the other thoughts that we had on this is that, let's say you get a tremendous amount, like a large response, right? Then that gives you more flexibility to develop different types of outreach teams. But if for some reason you don't get as robust of a response, then your outreach teams can be a little bit more targeted. So this way it allows for you to make that decision, and we can talk to you about options that you might want to consider once we have the general idea of how many people would be interested in assisting with that outreach.
Yes.
And the other thing we also thought about, since there was some discussion about potentially having some of the public events on like a Saturday, and then also if we're doing some virtual events, like what is the best time for people to participate?
That'll be really good info to have.
And then the last is, right now we pulled some best practices for some accessibility But again, Katie, I know you're going to have the other committee take a look at it, accessibility committee take a look at it, so we can always expand that. And I think one of the things that we can also do is if the accessibility committee has any questions on, let's just say they come up with a particular accessibility issue, that we can talk to them about, well, these are the options that we could potentially pursue in either an in-person or virtual meeting. And then that way we can maybe at least assess some of that ahead of time on how much we'll be able to do. Or if for some reason something is, if the situation is so unique, we might have to carve that out as something separate from the normal public meetings or in-person meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that you're saying that, and that you're open to it, and that that's something that, yeah, we want to keep communicating, that whatever it takes, we want as many people to participate as possible, and that's definitely going to mean being flexible and creative, and creating some different forums, ones that we might not even be thinking of or aware of now. So love that we're all open to that. I think that's really great, and it's going to help us a lot in this process.
Yeah, I think it'll be great. So I think the next steps then on this, I don't know why this keeps doing this, sorry. All right. The next steps I would say on this particular process is that we have I'll add another question based on Janet's comments. If anybody else has any thoughts or comments, please feel free. If you want, you can send me an email on them. I can maybe over the next week, I'll pull the rest of the questions together. I'll send them then to Katie, and then she can also solicit some additional questions from the accessibility committee. And then you'll have basically the survey to start pulling together on SurveyMonkey.
Okay. Valerie's going to finalize questions with Katie, and I'll bring in the accessibility committee. And then Katie and Larry can coordinate on getting it up and running in SurveyMonkey. And then we can work on this behind the scenes as a committee and pull in extra boards if they're willing to help out. We will definitely need help to spread the word, post flyers. If we're going to put the surveys in post offices, we need people power to do that. Yeah, if we need if we want to tap into the library or some other resource ourselves to have help available for filling out the survey if necessary. Pam, a senior coordinator in town, is great for doing that with the older adults of Lewisboro group. Yeah, so just we have to think about that, because that all requires volunteer power. Jan?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, when I sent in a lot of the questions, I thought this was more just kind of a how do you find out information about the town, not so much specifically associated with comp plan. And so I'm, do not feel, so if some of the questions are too long and don't fit the purpose of this meeting or this survey, that's fine. Don't feel any, there's no pride of ownership. You can just splash them out if that makes sense. Because I really thought it was a little bit more town board driven to ask, how do you find out information about the town, and not necessarily particularly comp plan related. And but I hadn't been part of all these meetings, so I didn't know that before. Thanks.
Actually, that's actually a really good point though, because some people might not be aware of the comprehensive plan, but they do pay attention to what, the parks and recreation programs that are coming on, right? So if they say, yes, I always look at those emails, well then great, maybe that's an avenue now that when we go do our media blitz, that we make sure that we tag that particular listserv. Dan?
I was just wondering why we couldn't look at actually doing a mailing, a physical snail mail for this. If this is kind of like the, the turning point and getting as much engagement as possible, then why not?
I don't know that I have an answer for that, Dan, but I did want to just remind everybody, when we did do the other survey, we got the word out electronically on the website, and it got onto social media, and there were a bunch of shares, and we got a lot of response initially from social media. We did try to do a written survey, and we did not really see a bump in responses from the mailing that we did. We also did surveys at post offices, and we did get some responses, but it was limited to maybe 18 or 20 responses that came in writing. And then finally, I think the biggest bump that we saw is when we got a reminder out in the final weeks of the survey campaign on the town email and the Parks Department newsletter, and that seemed to get the most responses, maybe just because it was the easiest. You could just click right through to the survey. But the best responses was initially from social media, and then at the end from the town communications, from the Parks Department and the town.
For equity purposes, I would love to do a mailing if the town board would be open to the cost of that, since that's totally separate from the project budget. Last year it costs a little under $2,000 to do every address in town. And we did take a lot of care to go through the spreadsheet to delete duplicate addresses. And Kirsten has a pile of the postcards that came back as undeliverable. So we can delete those from the list. Like we did everything we could to try to keep the budget, as minimal as possible. So it should be about that or less. Yes, I think I can safely say that, about that or less this year.
That was a postcard, though. It wasn't mailing the survey, right?
Yep, just a postcard. It had a QR code that you could scan with your phone that would take you right to the survey. And a little info about, what the comp plan was and why we were doing it. So it does help spread the word about, at the very least, it helps spread the word about the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I think for accessibility, maybe we've got it's bilingual, maybe even, I don't know if there's some, folks who are not computer enabled, maybe if you get a team of young high schoolers who are willing to go to seniors' house with their computer and work with them to enter their stuff in, or, some kind of way to get them engaged like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I can take the lead on doing the mailing because I did that last year. And again, we'll make a list of like the volunteer power that's needed to execute, and then circle back on how we're gonna make that happen. I do think because the post offices they were about 20 responses. We don't have data because of the way the survey was anonymous. We don't have data necessarily about why those people chose to use paper rather than online. But we did work with Pam and the older adults of Lewisboro group to give them access and help filling it out. So I think maybe some more targeted outreach to specific community organizations that could help their members fill out the survey might be a little bit more effective than just having the flyer sitting in a post office for somebody to go grab. So we can ponder that as well. But we want to make sure that wherever they are available by paper, it's equal access across town. So it doesn't make a difference where you live, that you have access to a paper survey.
Right, so I think then, I think next steps, because we did have, so I think in terms of like overall participation, we'll have to finalize the questions, develop like the postcards and our flyers, social media distribution, paper survey distribution, the assistance with filling out the survey and then also compiling the survey responses. So we can, I think, in between, over the next couple of weeks, we can identify the work that, we have kind of the list that's needed, and then maybe identify people to help assist with some of that. And we can do that internally over email. Okay. All right, great. And then we will have the aim, we do have it aimed at the library fair would be, we'll have everything ready to go by then. You can probably have paper copies, postcards, and then also, flyers to hand out about the survey as well, available for that event. Right, and then if there's, as also for that event, if there's any other flyers or additional information we need on the comprehensive plan, just let me know, and we can probably pull something together. But I think, at this point, it probably does make sense just to focus it on the public outreach, and then we can, the public participation survey, and then we can start talking about just general outreach and awareness of the comprehensive plan. And so we can talk about, starting our next comprehensive plan committee meeting, we can start talking about additional outreach on the comprehensive plan.
Okay, great. And can I tap into you and your team, Valerie, to help with what the flyer should say?
Yeah, absolutely. We can help. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about, what's needed, and we can help assist pulling that together.
Great.
Great.
Did anybody
right,
have any questions about that or thoughts? Kirsten?
I don't know about the Wi-Fi at Onitru, but is it something, could we actually have a kiosk and people complete their survey live while they're at the event?
Oh, good question. I don't know the answer.
I'll look into that, Kirsten.
Okay, Andrea?
Yeah, the Wi-Fi not so awesome at Onitru, but I don't know if there's anything they can do to boost that during the event. I was just making a list leading up to tonight too, and then while I was listening, our supervisor has the town announcements that go out. So Mary Hafter would be very useful in making sure that I think they go out. Dan, they go out weekly. I think they go out weekly. That's one. Tony has his supervisor Facebook page. I have my council person Facebook page. There's some overlap, but it doesn't really matter. Different audiences. Also, Barbara Flock-Mangione, I don't know how she does it, but she manages to post simultaneously on every single Facebook group of Lewisboro there is at the same time. She knows things, I think, before the town knows that are happening half the time. So, and she's interested. I think she was the one that asked the question about it, the last town board meeting. So some interest is coming. And we can make sure, both Dan and I'm sure, to make sure that at the town board meetings leading up to the library fair, that we announce where they can find the information. The other thing I thought of was the local newspapers. The ads are not cheap, but we were talking about mailers. So sometimes like a little quarter page ad or something, we can look into, what that would cost, because there are people out there that don't get on social media and they find out things that way. I know we talked about pop-ups. I know that I did a few of them. We actually had a really good turnout for people coming out and signing petitions and things. So that might be something I know that you guys talked about. You already covered the seniors, because I was thinking the same thing, that, many of these seniors, they'll see something in the newspaper. They're not likely to get online or use the computer. So we should probably have another method by which to get their thoughts as well. I think that's it. Those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you.
So I
Anybody
think
else?
think in terms of schedules, if because typically you want to keep like a survey open for maybe like a month, because if you take it, take too long, people will say, oh, I have 2 months to fill this out. And then, so maybe what we can do is if we plan to have hopefully the survey somewhere beginning of September prior to the public library fair, having it closed then somewhere at the beginning of October. And then that allows us to move into public events for October to publicize the comprehensive plan process. Excuse me, I got a little caught in my throat. So does that, and then we can also look at doing some pop-up events maybe after the library fair if you want to also publicize the public participation survey. And maybe we can reach out to the senior advisor, and I have her name, and we can see about distributing the paper copies of the survey directly to the seniors.
That sounds good. Is a month sound okay to everybody for having it start to finish, having it open for a month? Okay.
I also think in terms of this one, it should be a pretty straightforward and simple survey. So hopefully people will be able to answer it less than 10 minutes. And where I think some of the other surveys might take a little longer, might make people want to think about it a little bit longer. And so having that open for a longer period of time would be helpful.
Yes.
All right. Anything else in the survey before we move on? Okay. So we have a little bit of time, and so I just wanted to touch a little bit about next steps, and then I'll kind of open it up to any questions that the steering committee had. We haven't had a chance yet. I mean, the first 2 meetings there was a lot of information packed into it. I think as you will see as we go through the rest of this comprehensive plan process, the meetings will be not necessarily later in the agenda, but we will have a little bit more time in terms of, questions and answers from the committee, and then also just general discussions of additional topics we want to bring up. But what we're working on, as I noted before, with the last email I sent you, that we will be providing you like bi-weekly updates as to the work that we're undertaking. It does take time to pull together all the data, but we're planning to come back to this committee back in October. I know we're not anticipating having a September meeting, mostly because we're going to be in the full swing of this public participation survey, so we won't have those full results then. And then also we will be undertaking a lot of the data analysis for the inventory and analysis reporting. And so we're planning to have a PowerPoint presentation for you as to the data we collected and information that we started identifying at the next meeting. It won't necessarily be all the topics, but it will be a number of the topics. And a couple of things that prevented us from having some of the information like ready for September is that we're working on tax IDs. We pulled off all the tax IDs from the Westchester County website. And there's about 164 parcels that, while they have a section, block, and lot number, they don't have addresses or their actual tax property codes. And one of the important parts about the tax property codes, it really identifies how that land is being used. And that helps us in the land use analysis portion of the comprehensive plan, and also helps us identify if there are non-residential uses in residential zones. So there's a lot of information we can glean from that, and we'd like to try to get that data as accurate as possible. So Kirsten is helping us with that, as well as the assessor's office. So we appreciate their assistance, and so we should have those finished shortly, and so therefore we'll be able to start pulling that data. The other thing we're also working on is like the Hamlet boundaries, and we're working with Jan and as well as Maureen to develop those. And we have like an internal call this week because we're going to talk a little bit more about their application or our suggestions for their application in the comprehensive plan process, because we understand that Hamlets, everybody is, very much self-identifies particular areas in where they live into one hamlet or another. And so we want to make sure that, our thoughts were, instead of having them as concrete boundaries, maybe looking them as more of like planning areas. We will talk about the hamlet areas, but we can derive data from them. But whether a particular boundary area is on one street versus another street doesn't necessarily mean somebody's in an area and not in an area, but it's really just holistically looking at them as planning areas. So that's something we're going to talk a little bit about too with Jan and Maureen this week, so that we can kind of finish up those boundary areas and then be able to start pulling some of the data based on those areas as well.
And Valerie, even if we're off by one block or another, the residents will tell us, and there's no big deal putting somebody into Cross River from South Salem.
Right, exactly. Well, that's why our thought is, so we are going to break down the data into like what I'm going to call the Hamlet planning areas. But if for some reason we're not specifically identifying those as very specific boundaries, so that people don't feel like we're now designating their property in like Lewisboro when they're really in Vista. So I think that's sort of the thought on the way we would approach it in the comprehensive plan, so that when people are looking at these maps, but we're going to talk a little bit about it some more with Maureen and Jan later on this week, and then sort of finalize some of those areas, and then we'll distribute the maps and some of the boundaries to the full steering committee for your review and comment. And so we're hoping to get that done over the next month or so. Well, actually within like the next month internally, so that we can then start pulling that data and then also have data to present to you in October on that as well.
Yes, on that topic, just want to reiterate that behind the scenes, there was a lot of email traffic going back and forth. I think the consensus from the steering committee and from the other boards that are participating is that, we're not looking to create formal boundary areas, that we're just using the data for planning purposes. But if the town board did want to do that in any way, shape, or form, that's under your purview, and that would be something separate that you would undertake simultaneously with this process. But we're not seeking to do that ourselves. That's not the goal here.
We'll refer in the comprehensive plan, like the Golden's Bridge Hamlet, right? We will refer to very specific hamlets, but that will be more of like when we're describing what's taking place in the hamlets. We can also, but for the planning areas, we can say that, like, for example, the Golden Bridge planning area will have a certain population, right? And so we can just pull that. But whether, because when I was driving through the town this past weekend, and I was driving around looking at where the signs are and where there's even individual boundary areas already designated on certain streets. And again, the history of where those signs got put up or reason, because some of them are clearly state signs, some of them more local signs. So my point is there's probably a lot of history behind all the different boundary areas. And I think in terms of the comprehensive plan, the end result is not going to change if one street or another street is the designated planning, boundary for the comprehensive plan. I think you'll get the general trends no matter which way we go with some of the boundaries that we're going to define based upon the numbers that we're able to pull throughout the whole boundary area. So anyhow, so we're having that internal meeting this week to kind of talk a little bit more, because we'll be sending out maps for Jan and Maureen to start really looking at and confirming where we are developing what we're calling those planning areas and the boundaries of those. And then we'll start pulling that information for this committee as well. And not all environmental topic areas are going to be specifically Hamlet driven, because some, like, for example, some of your, like, the wetland areas or environmental areas, those don't necessarily have to be very specific Hamlet driven. But what really will be is like your socioeconomics, your demographic data, your land use data, some of your zoning aspects, you know, even I get even some of the transportation multimodal aspects, they'll be important because maybe there's going to be certain hamlets that have like, you know, a much more structured sidewalk network versus others, you know, especially you have some very windy roads in the town of Lewisboro. And so, you know, just in terms of bike lanes, it's just not going to be possible in some roads because they're just, you know, that narrow. Where other the hamlet areas might have a little bit more of that ability. So those are the types of topic areas that we're going to focus on in terms of hamlets. And you'll see as we go through the comprehensive plan process. But when we present to you in October, we'll just be giving you little snapshots. You know, some of that information is also going to be brought over to the public workshop. But when you get the inventory analysis report, it will be fully comprehensive. There'll be a lot of detail there. And we think it's going to be best to give you the full draft report so you can read it from beginning to end, because a lot of sections kind of build upon each other as opposed to just giving you individual sections. So there's a lot coming down the pike, but we're now like at this point, we've dealt with a lot of the initial feedback that we needed from this committee, and now it's going to be a little bit more full speed ahead. Any other questions on this? Janet?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that some of the work that's done, like on the 164 parcels, isn't lost. Is there a plan to get that information back to Westchester County so it's there for perpetuity?
Yes, we can do that. Yes, absolutely. We'll do that. Yeah, and then I think any updates we make to, because Westchester County is actually, and I'm sure you probably received, or your planner might have received the email, but they're updating their zoning maps at this point in time. So I know a couple of the communities that we work with in Westchester County have gotten the emails. So we will also, you know, any information that we develop or any new data layers that we develop, we can always share with the county as well.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Are we in the open session part of the meeting?
Sure. Yes.
I just wanted to ask about something actually that Janet Anderson brought up. Like, I don't remember which of our meetings as a committee, but there was a study done on one of the lakes, and there was a tool that seemed like it was super effective, like a crowdsourced kind of GIS tool. Jen, I remember you describing that. You know what I'm talking about? I think it was on Lake Wassabuck. I'm just wondering if that's something that, if it's something that we could maybe implement, like as one of the planning workshop tools, and if so, if it needs like some lead time to get something going on that. I want to bring it up now.
Janet, you're muted. You're muted, Janet.
All right. So Larry, I didn't hear exactly, you were sort of breaking up a little bit, and it's odd that then I was muted, but anyway, you were talking about a GIS, what on Walkabuck? I'm not sure I got it.
The
I think on
crowdsourcing tool.
Oh, okay. The
Yeah.
crowdsourcing tool, it was used as part of the study that was done on the septic issues around Lake Walkabuck, and it was a really great tool. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I asked about trying to get it to linger on, and it was too expensive for Three Lakes Council certainly to buy, and so I think it's disappeared. I don't know if that, and that was Barton and Logajuice that ran it. I don't know if that, if they have it up for any other studies they're doing at the current point, but it was nice. It sort of asked people to just geolocate or sort of put a pin and make comments about anything they wanted to. They had them in several different categories. I don't know how much work it would be to try to implement it here. I think they adopted a framework they had.
So if that's like, so we were planning to do like sort of a online outreach survey. So we can take a look, originally we were thinking about utilizing like SurveyMonkey to provide, not only like very specific questions, but potentially like visual images or, get feedback off of that. But if, this is something that we can also take a look at in terms of getting, very specific feedback, like you said, on mapping. Another thing we can do, and this is probably what we were going to do for the Hamlet areas, is that since we'll be able to kind of utilize some of the maps and zoom in basically on the hamlets as part of, like, since they're going to be virtual, there's this annotation function in Zoom where you can actually identify very specifically, and areas and make comments or, basically put hearts on a map, say, I really love this, or this is a problem here. And then you can actually take screenshots of those images, and that's a way of getting feedback. So we were probably going to utilize maybe some of those techniques when we deal with the individual Hamlet areas. So that's one way. It's very similar to that concept.
While we're on software, do you ever use any of these ideation tools? Because I've been involved in various projects like this with big groups, and they seem to be pretty effective, where somebody's got an idea and then people are logging in and voting and commenting on it, and the sort of most popular and engaging ideas float to the top, and
Right. So that, Zoom has some of the polling and different functions. And I think a lot of that, when we start talking about some of these, virtual meetings, we can talk about what it is exactly that we're looking to, gain as part of the public feedback. In terms of, like, for example, like the SWOT, the first public workshop, those types of polling techniques or those things can be utilized through the Zoom functions. The other thing too is sometimes it's just good to have, you do have people that are not comfortable with utilizing, some of those softwares. And so sometimes it's just easier to have that kind of facilitation as well as like person to person. So it really just depends. I mean, some of that stuff is great. I've been in a number of different, public meetings, but sometimes it's also a little bit, it's easier to have things a little bit more streamlined and simple, especially for those that are not used to the functionality of the virtual platforms. But we can talk about those options as we get closer to some of the public engagements, especially the virtual ones.
Yeah, the thing I liked about this this crowdsourcing was that it was open for, I don't know, a month or so, and it allowed people to put down things like, here's a spot that's really, I see a lot of erosion. Here's a spot that I really, think is a good viewpoint. Here's a spot. So they could kind of put it on as almost as if you went out for a walk and you said, this is gorgeous, and you wanted to come back and put it on. I don't know how appropriate or, feasible or anything it is, but one of the things I liked about it was its enduring nature.
Mm-hmm.
So we can, we can look into some of those options, because maybe that's something that we can consider just putting out, like, as another means of promoting the comprehensive plan, is just like a question, right? Maybe even in something we can even consider doing, like a question a month, and just keeping a poll open and just getting some different feedback. And that's, it doesn't have to be a very specific time frame. And then we just collect those different topics or different questions throughout the comprehensive plan process. So those are, we can bring back some ideas, and that might be something, a way of also something fun and then engaging, and then you're getting more public participation. And then we can also, at the end of the question, say, don't forget, we're having a public workshop on this date, or, check out this website. So.
Love it.
All right. So we'll work on coming back with some like unique public participation and outreach ideas. Okay. Great. So at the next meeting then, we'll start talking about public participation and community outreach. We'll hopefully have the results of the public participation survey, so we can talk a little bit about the outreach teams. And then we'll also start diving in a little bit into the inventory analysis and some of the information that we're collecting.
Did you have your hand raised, Mark?
Yeah, just could we refresh on the population we're looking to engage? Is it live in Lewisboro, meaning that you can own or rent, but you don't have to live, like if you own property here, but perhaps you don't live here, and work here, because when we did our first Survey Monkey, so is that right? So like you work here, you own property here, or you basically live or rent here, is that right?
That's a good question. What's best practices here, Valerie?
So I think in terms of the outreach, public participation and outreach, I would think we're looking at two different buckets. For this particular survey, the public participation survey, I think it would be good to find out if they live, or if they rent, or if they're a business, right? Because then that also would help you when they leave their email, you'll have a better idea of like, oh, this is maybe a merchant, or this is a business owner. So they might be able to help out with some of the economic development aspects. So that will help you with determining also the initial assessment of some of the public outreach teams. In terms of the actual outreach online surveys and stuff, I think that will depend on the information that we're collecting. So while, like, for example, if it's something about public parks, as much as it might be helpful to know that does somebody live within the town, but if people frequent the town, and they really want to identify and they want to say, look, we really love this park, we want to put our thoughts into it, maybe those particular surveys, you don't necessarily need to have that background information. So I think it'll just depend upon the point of the survey and what information we're trying to gather. So, but for the first survey that we're working on, I would say it would probably be good to have that information, so you have a little sense of who this person is and maybe some of the categories that they might be able to assist with, especially if they're interested in the outreach.
Is there an age limit? Do they have to be over 18 or over 21, or are we kind of soliciting potentially students?
Look, there's always requirements for volunteer time in the high school. So this would be great to have, students willing to participate.
Yeah. So is best practice just in terms of gathering feedback and producing the comprehensive plan that all of those voices are encouraged and included, like regardless of age, regardless of living versus working in town, like that's all included, and that's generally how this goes.
Right. So I think, right. So if we're looking at, like, let's say, for example, we're doing a survey, and one of the questions we really do want to know is how many people live in town, how many people work in town, then we'll definitely want to include those very specific questions. If we want people to tell us about their particular parks or open spaces or areas that they find that are problematic in terms of mobility, then you're going to want maybe the customer to also respond, right? Because they're coming into your community to spend money in your community. So it doesn't matter whether they actually live in your community. They clearly frequent your community and they value your community enough that they want to take the survey. So that's where you would want to have anybody participate in those surveys. When we deal with very specific, we might want to ask some very specific questions on the Hamlet areas, right? Do you live in a particular Hamlet area? Then you'll know that if for some reason the survey skews one Hamlet area over another, not necessarily in terms of total numbers, because you're clearly going to have certain population densities in certain Hamlet areas over another, but in terms of overall percentages, then maybe you know, okay, we need to get further representation for the Hamlet areas. So I'm not trying to be so ambiguous in my answers, but it really just depends on the survey. And I think the comprehensive plan survey, we will have a better sense of what exactly information we're going to be extracting once we have the first public workshop. Because I think you already extracted a lot of really good baseline information in your first survey. And so we're going to build upon that. So we don't necessarily have to have a survey ready to go from step one, but we're going to have that survey a little bit further in. And then we were just talking about potentially having some other like outreach things throughout, like maybe each month or something like that. So when we develop those, we could always add some of those additional questions onto those surveys.
I have a question for committee members. We won't be having a meeting with Valerie on September 19th, but could we have one with us? That way we keep the party going. We have some other topics we can use the time on, grants, for example. Okay, great.
Oh yeah, and I'm also speaking of grants, Katie, I have not, we probably need to follow up with your grant writer.
We don't have a grant writer, but Mark has graciously offered to lead the charge on the Greenway Grant. And we do have the grants committee, which is a volunteer committee. So there's some coordinating there that we can do.
Okay, that sounds good. The grant deadlines for the Greenway Grant are September 2nd and November, I think 1st or 2nd. So there's 2 different deadlines over the next couple months. And then also, if there's any other information that you need for the next committee meeting, let me know, and I'm happy to send that along as well.
Great, thank you so much.
So you will definitely be hearing from me over the next couple of weeks, and we'll get started on things. And Katie, you'll probably hear from me tomorrow with our to-do list. So.
Perfect. Okay, yes, I will coordinate the to-do list and loop in everyone as necessary. We're right on time for ending, which I'm so excited about. But did anybody feel like they didn't get to say something? Any last minute burning questions? Okay, well, we've got the email communication, so please feel free to reach out that way if there's anything lingering. Great, thank you, Valerie.
Excellent, thank you. And don't forget to send any additional questions you want as part of the public participation survey to me over the next week. Okay, great.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the committee members and the extra chairs who have attended. Thank you so much. We're glad you're in the loop, and our town board liaisons. Thank you for both being here. And to members of the public who stuck it out and made it to the end of the meeting, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We'll hopefully get you involved. We want you involved in the process as soon as possible. So thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Katie, can we have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, thank you. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great.